안녕하십니까? 고울담 치과병원 치과보철과 김학구입니다.
Hello, I'm Kim Hak-kyu of the Koaltam Dental Clinic. Last time you looked at the screw loosening and fracture. This time we will look at abutment and implant complications. So I'm going to talk about abutment and then implant fracture and clinical considerations. So in case of external connection, screw is the weak link. So screw loosening happens before abutment is fractured. But for the TS, internal conical connection, the abutment and screw is locked even if there's screw loosening. So the abutment and screw upper part is loosened and resulting abutment fracture and implant fracture in most cases. So if you look at how the aspect of abutment fracture, these days two-piece transfer abutment is widely used, and upper part of the implant and abutment meets in the neck, which is the weak point. So if the abutment is looses, the neck breaks. So for rigid abutment and other one-piece abutments, like screw fracture, if there's abutment loosening, the screw thread is fractured. Typically, implant and abutment meets in the interface area, and that is where it's fractured. But if it's not put in the long axis and angle abutment is used, or there is a lot of milling, then the abutment upper part becomes weaker, and that area sometimes fractures. So for anterior part, due to aesthetics, zirconia was favored. But in case of zirconia abutment, zirconia as a material has a higher possibility of fracture. So here in the literature also shows that in the long-term usage, if full zirconia abutment, that the occlusal force is rather weak. In most cases, in case of if there could be zirconia fracture, but zirconia itself could also wear down the inside of the implant. Hence, the connection sometimes is destroyed. So let's look at some cases to think about the abutment fracture. For this patient in 2008, had implants at another clinic, and I saw her for the first time in 2012, and implant actually fell off in number 36 while eating, and it was a cement type. So if you look at the X-ray, typically if there's a rigid abutment fracture, then you see there is a lot it shows like that. And if you look at the implant that fell out, there's a wear and there's a line. So the patient was rather elderly. So when masticating, she didn't feel it, but there was a fracture. So you could use like Explorer and remove it, and on the implant level you take impression, and two-piece type abutment was used for remake. Then I emphasize the importance of regular checkup, so taking X-ray and occlusal assessment every 6 months, and every year scaling was done, so it was okay for a few years. But then she came back. She was biting something hard, and the implant again fell off. So I was worried about fracture, and it showed that there's abutment and implant neck was broken, and that part was still in the implant, and screw was also fractured. Seems that there was also regular checkup, but due to high occlusal force and with the biting, it broke. So it was used for 8 years, but again, here also we removed it, but implant was okay. So for remake, abutment, I tried to remove it. So in the past, what was invisible, using rigid diamond tools or other bars, you try to grind it and remove it. Now in DSR kit, there's AIR tip. So in a reverse direction, you engage and the left right side slowly without much force. If you loosen it, then you actually can smoothly remove, but it's not always the case. Then using ejector in various directions, you could hit it, or using forceps and using leverage, you take it out, and mostly it comes out. But if it still stays in place, like in the past, loop bar can be connected to the abutment, and without damaging the implant, you put the line and again use AR tip, then it mostly can be removed. So after removing it, so usually fractured implant or abutment screw shows that there is always reason. So for this case also, the angle was moved more on the lingual side, and on the opposite side, number 10 and 14, there was scissor bite. So there's not much of occlusive force, and she was chewing mostly on the left side where there's implant. So 2 or 3 times of occlusive force and fatigue fracture potential was very clear. And she was 33 when I first she came first time, and after 8 years, she's 72. And first, it was rigid abutment type, although I did not make it. And I saw possibility of losing a screw fracture, abutment fracture. For continued retightening, transfer abutment PMP based ER type was what I delivered. But with the change of times, trans abutment monolithic material full zirconia was created for her. So I hope that the implant can age with her, and hopefully she can use until she dies. But she might come back. Then I hope that at time also I could only change the prosthesis. So another fracture case, and you can see the reason for the upper case. As you can see, on the palate, it's placed a bit palatally, and cusp angle is rather steep. So paroxysm or cusp angle, if it's steep, then if it's lateral forces, central occlusion, there's a force load, but there could also be high lateral force. And if it's big as natural teeth, then buccal cantilever also becomes high. The joint, there is a lot of stress, and there could be fracture. So when I remade it, then a smaller prosthesis cusp angle was also lowered, and at the time for 6-7 years, it's used okay. So it's again referred case, and the bottom case also referred case. So it was moving, so I removed it. So it was full zirconia bridge. And for that case, PFM or gold, unlike that, for porcelain, if there's a fracture, gold, it wears down, but for zirconia, it doesn't wear down. So occlusal assessment needs to be very delicate. Otherwise, implant takes a lot of stress load, and that results in screw loosening, and abutment could have a fatigue fracture. So before that, I removed it, and for the back teeth, there was also cement loss. If 2 splinted crown, 1 abutment, if there's cement loss, then it becomes a big cantilever bridge and inevitably will result in fracture. So for abutment, to reduce abutment fracture, for OSTEM, a lot of efforts have been made for about 10 years ago to reduce this type of fracture. The abutment side design and materials were changed. So for the inside diameter was extended on the abutment, and screw size, head size was made smaller, and abutment internal diameter was extended. We need to know this because by 09-08, in the past, if you had this type of abutment, the screw that you use, if the screw is loosened, then look at the head shape and its angle. And with the new screw, it's not really compatible. So if possible, you must find matching screws to reduce possibility of any fracture or loosening. So besides this design, then when we select as a dentist abutment, thicker diameter abutment is better. But even if with other abutment, emergency file or within some range, thicker titanium abutment has a stronger fracture resistance. So as I said, full zirconia in case of that type of abutment, especially internal type and connection area, zirconia is a lot of put under stress, and that could result in fracture. So I do not recommend it. So if you need to think about aesthetics, then tie link abutment can be used, the connection titanium, and then the upper part zirconia. So to improve the aesthetic, that type of abutment would be the recommendation. In the past, ready-made abutment, if it could not be used, then gold casting or MP casting abutment was used to create custom abutment. And with that, you could have good prognosis, but in internal connection, the connection side, by polishing it inside, the fit could become weaker, then it could loosen the abutment, hence resulting in abutment fracture, or implant itself, it could put in a very bad stress. So with the advancement CAD/CAM, rather than this type of abutment, pre-milled abutment can be used, and this would be better in terms of fractures, resistance, and for long-term implant prognosis. If there are some people that use third-party abutment for internal connection, then it might fit on your hand. But if you look at this photo, there is always a gap, especially on the internal connection side. This is very important. So rather than use third-party abutment, the company's quality pre-milled abutment needs to be used to match the connection. And that is a way to ensure long-term good prognosis. When I talk about screw, but with adoption of implant system means also understanding about implant connection. So fracture or loosening means the abutment did not seat well and it's not a good fit. And there's a stress put in and it becomes mobile. So for single case, you could use screw type, but for multiple case, if you use screw type, the angles, even if it's parallel, there could be sync. So it will be misfit. Hence, for internal connection of implants, then rather than screw type, cementation type, or ER type prosthesis is better as it can have passive fit. Additionally, for internal connection, there could be sink down. So to compensate for that, you take impression on the impression level, you take impression on the head level, and you could just take at one go implant placement, but there could be error stacking up, resulting in various adverse events. So two-step impression taking is the recommendation. So you take implant level impression and then connect the abutment. And that side, even if there are error, you're tightening and you can check again. So in sink down or provision can be used for continuing checkup. So once it stabilizes through that, then you take abutment impression. The abutment implants would not be under negative bad loads, and on a long term it could be more fit and it could be more stable, and it would help for better prognosis. Then let's look at implant fracture. So this is very strong occlusive force patient with the implant 20 years ago. So there could be on horizontal fracture, implant top side fracture. So for internal case also, if it's a smaller diameter implant used compared to occlusive force, there could be this horizontal fracture. So for this referred patient, what we can think is that for number 30s, although it's number 7, very small or low depth implant is placed. For number 40s, at the back, it's external. Number 7 external, but number 6, again, it's a smaller diameter implant. So it's splinted and resulting tearing. So we need a wider implant on the posterior side, and for this bone loss, so the small implant was removed, and number 6 was internal bone level, so TS implant. Number 40s, number 7, for extraction, it still has a usage. So for number 6, external type, and then splinted for resolution. So after stable occlusion, the remaining implant bone loss was compensated with the cortical bone regeneration. So after abutment is stronger, then 4.0 internal connection implant, then sometimes results in tearing. And the lower side, it's a rare case, but after 1 year of implant placement, she felt pain, and the X-ray showed, and the implant side, wider abutment was forcibly put in. So there's implant tearing, resulting peri-implantitis, and he or she had a bone loss, so I had to remove it. So internal conical implant crack showed that we show various clinical result. So for this, interlevel bone level implant was used, and when first came, she said there was uncomfort. So she came in 2013, but there was no clinical evidence, and so it was very hard to see what was wrong. But fortunately, it was a type. So I thought maybe there could be screw loosening, and if you put in too much force, sometimes it results in uncomfort. So I opened it up and checked, and so there's a loss of preload, and additional torque was therefore applied. So screw was retightened, and I adjusted occlusion. Then she came back after a few years, about 3 years later. She said implant was moving and there was pain. So with hands, I could feel it's moving, and X-ray also didn't look good. On the root side, if there's a vertical root fracture, then there could be bone loss and there could be tearing. Then the bone becomes thinner and it looks black on the X-ray. So here again, abutment, loosening, and to see whether that is a possibility, I opened it up and saw it. And if it's torque, you should stop. But at some point, it just becomes loose. That shows that teared implant, by tightening the abutment, it becomes wider, and torque is therefore becomes weaker. So written without microscope, I could be sure of the tearing. So I said implant need to be removed, and it was removed. After that, wider implant, TS implant, could be placed, but for this patient, the occlusal force was really strong. So external hexa type implant was used, and it's maintained quite well up to now. So for Koreans, especially if you have a strong occlusal force, a muscle, then you should go with wider implant. If possible, 4.0 diameter implant is more recommended. Or the internal side, because of its structure, if there is strong occlusal force, inevitably it could result in fracture. Hence, one up SS system or US system, like if butt joint needs to be there to support the occlusal force, and using that would result in better results. And also, if you look at just implant for internal connection, one-piece abutment, the connecting area and two-piece abutment connection area is a bit different from the hex and non-hex also. So you have your own preference, but if possible, whether you use two-piece or one-piece, or whether you use hexa or non-hexa, if possible, abutment implant needs to be good fit. and it match well, and there could be sink down possibility. Hence, you should also do regular checkup every 6 years or every 1 month, 1 year. You open it up and retighten it and do occlusal adjustment. That is a must. Still, if the occlusal force is really strong, then to patient, you need to educate the patient. So during the day, don't clench too much. And if that habits continue at night, if you see the muscle, if it's really tight and strong, again, educate the patient, use a bruxism splint or do Botox injection. Now, full zirconia is mostly used, but for this type of patient, if the occlusal force is too strong, then gold might be better option in terms of where other things could result in natural occlusal adjustment. So changing material might be the better option. So summary, implant, abutment, screw, and other things for long-term stability, proper distribution, number, and diameter of implants needs to be used, and restaurant-driven positioning should be used, and use properly designed and manufactured implant needs to be used. And after that, patient age, and depending on the oral changes, you have to do adequate adjustments and regular checkup. So up to now, we look at various implant-related complications. I hope this has become a good learning opportunity, and I will see you next time. Thank you very much.